Yeah, so I'll make a quick statement. We're here because we've released the result of our fire investigation into the University of Hawaii's laboratory explosion that happened in March. And I'll be happy to explain any of the facts inside regarding the outcome, but we've determined that it was an accidentally caused explosion due to a pressure gauge in proximity to a spark that caused the explosion. However, like all of our investigations, fire or explosion, we follow what is an accepted national standard of fire investigation. It's built around a scientific method that allows us to make a comprehensive investigation, beginning with the scene, talking to the witnesses, looking at the evidence that's there at the scene, such as the structure, the contents of the building, and trying to figure out where the fire, or in this case the explosion, occurred and what was the source of it. We are limited with some of our scientific capabilities in terms of laboratory analysis, and we always have a portion of our investigation that will say our recommendation if further investigation is needed by oftentimes insurance companies or other parties, that they send materials that we preserve and transfer over for further analysis in a laboratory setting. So we're finished at this time with our investigation, and if other investigations that are concurrent have other outcomes, we'll fully support them with information on ours and continue to try to help them reach whatever conclusions that they might need based upon what we know, what we did, and what we said in our investigation.
Can you go a little bit into this pressure gauge and what exactly happened and what was the problem?
Unfortunately, not to the extent that you're probably hoping, because that's where it gets into beyond our capability. We just know that the gauge was not meant to be in a placement of where it was, according to information that we obtained, and that it was the source of the what you might call leak of vapors that ignited.
And you said there was a spark nearby?
There was a switch that produced a spark when it was operated, so putting together the source of ignition with the proximity of the fuel, that's the conclusion that our investigators were able to determine.
And the switch you're talking about was a switch to the gauge itself?
No, I don't believe it's to the gauge. The gauge is an instrument that measures pressure in a closed cylinder, but the switch was to a component of the system. What exact one, I'm not positive of.
How far away was the switch from the gauge?
There again, I'm not sure of the actual linear distance, but close enough that it did ignite the gas that came out of the pressure gauge.
Where did you get the information that the gauge was not where it was supposed to be?
That came from interviews with the people in the laboratory, and based upon information we were given and examination of the gauge, that became the focus of our conclusion.
And where is the gauge now?
That's still with the University of Hawai'i.
He talked, in the report it mentioned a missing gauge that was initially in photos and then missing.
A missing gauge?
Yeah. Yes.
So it's a missing gauge cover that it's probably somewhere in the lab. It has to be determined, but quite honestly, they know exactly what the model, make and model is and everything, so it's really, I think that's the issue that was identified in the fire report, was the type of gauge it was. All the other components are there. The lab, as you can imagine, is still in disarray, but they know what make and model the gauges. We know what make and model the gauges.
The report says the gauge went missing between March 17th and March 21st, so at some point, but the explosion was on the 16th, I think. So the gauge, it went missing the day after the explosion?
So I know that we have pictures of the gauge cover. There was a team that did go in there to do some bio lab cleanup. And we're in the process of locating the gauge, but actually we're kind of in a standby mode. I think once again, the fact of the matter is that we know exactly what kind of gauge it is. And so it's not a question of whether this particular gauge was faulty. It's a question of whether this gauge was appropriate for this use. And since we have the make, the model, all that information, though of course we do want to make sure we get that gauge cover, but the rest of the components of the gauge were gathered up, and once again, at some point maybe it had gotten moved, and you know, when the scene is released, because HIOSH is still, it's still closed because the investigation is still ongoing. We're confident that it will turn up, but the fact of the matter is, the important thing is we know exactly what that gauge is, and that's the question is whether that gauge was appropriate for that use.
The report talked about earlier in the week, well, there was an internal explosion that was reported. What was supposed to happen when something like that happens? Is that reported to somebody in the lab?
So I think.
Well, actually, I
Go ahead.
believe that the investigations report, I know that in the fire report, main report said that we were told that prior explosion had not been reported to the university, but had occurred. So apparently it wasn't of enough energy or significance to cause any damage or harm and was left unreported. So the first that the university laboratory managers as well as the fire investigators heard about it was while doing the investigation for the more serious explosion that unfortunately caused the damage and injury.
Is there a protocol?
Let me step in real fast and just say a couple of quick things that I want to make sure gets stated. First of all, I mean, the University of Hawaii, we cannot thank the fire department enough for this thorough investigation, and even more so their response that night. I mean, they just were phenomenal and worked so well with us, and really it just mitigated the situation as quickly as possible, and we can't thank them enough for that. As far as the investigation itself, this report from the Hawaii Fire Department, Honolulu Fire Department, is a very, of course, important piece of information, more than a piece of information, a lot of information. And the final investigation, or the independent investigation, is still ongoing. So there's a lot of things that we're not going to be able to comment on, though I can answer your protocol question. And once again, this independent investigation, we brought in the University of California Center for Laboratory Safety. This is a national expert. They have, of course, obtained much of the same information the fire department has obtained, and much more. And so we'll have a more comprehensive understanding of exactly what happened when this investigation is complete, and that's expected to be in April. As far as the protocols that are in place, we have an Office of Environmental Health and Safety that inspect laboratories on an annual basis. They provide training. They make sure that there are safety protocols that are in place. And so there are a number of things that happen. But once again, that one incident, I guess, before the accident in March was not reported to anybody beyond the laboratory, but this is all going to be part of that overall investigation as we move forward.
Okay. So there are no protocols where it should have been reported at this point?
You know, I don't want to speak out of turn here, but I imagine that it should have been reported.
What about What about the case of looks like the researcher told fire investigators about a static shock that that had been a problem, and she told the professor she was working for, but
So
was
once again, I
that
think
an
that would be
issue?
part of the overall investigation, though it's not really certain if that actually has anything to do with the actual incident in March.
So,
Go ahead.
so the report did say that the researcher herself, bought the equipment. Do you know where she bought the equipment from, what company, and was it the equipment itself that was the faulty in the whole investigation that was faulty?
So I would refer to the fire department report as, something that is of record right now. But as far as all that's happening, those were some, there still needs to be interviews that need to be conducted, and the investigation is ongoing. So we don't really want to, it would be inappropriate to answer those questions because we don't have all the answers just yet. So I can promise you that when that investigation by the UC lab safety team is complete, a lot of those answers will be, a lot of those questions will be answered.
Is there anything in the works yet, as you move forward, that you're looking at that could try and sort of prevent things like this from happening again?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this was a wake-up call not just for the University of Hawaii, but I think for laboratories across the country. And we've been in communication with a lot of different organizations regarding what happened. I can tell you right here on the UH Manoa campus that our Office of Environmental Health and Safety, shortly after the accident, reviewed or surveyed all of the labs, about 500 plus on campus, to make sure that there's not a similar experiment happening, which involves pressurized oxygen and hydrogen, and there were none. And even before that happened, Hawaii Natural Energy Institute had already stopped all of their lab work to make sure that everything was following the proper safety protocols. We've also begun, and I'm sorry, I have to refer to my notes here because I want to get the name correctly, but we're convening a chemical and physical safety committee, and it will be representative of all the schools and colleges that do research, and it'll be working in relations with the other safety-related committees, because we already have a number of these committees with research. And of course, they're going to identify and implement protocols and processes to further strengthen the safety of our laboratories. But I think everyone should understand that we already have a very robust safety protocols in place. This is a university that secures hundreds of millions of dollars in research funding every year, and you wouldn't be able to do that if you had unsafe laboratories. But that doesn't mean that they can't be better, and our mission is to set a national standard on that front.
Was she doing, the experiment that the researcher was doing was routine? What was different this time around?
Yeah, once again, I think I'm going to have to say we have to wait for that final investigation that's going to come out by that independent investigator, the UC Center for Laboratory Safety, before, we want to make sure that we have all of the details, all the information correctly. The fire department focuses on what happened that night. We're focused on everything. And until we have all those answers, I'm afraid I can't answer those specific questions.
All right, that's a very good point, Dan. The focus of our investigation is what we call cause and origin. Most people think of us as investigating just fires, but we do investigate explosions, many that some of you have been covering in the past, Waikele bunkers, out at Sand Island with a processing tank due to hot work being done. But the point is we investigate fires and explosions for looking at where they started and what was the source of their ignition. And we don't necessarily gather the information into how it occurred to the extent that you're asking, because we're able to determine through layers of interviews that this is the actions that were underway in the area. But the motives behind that, what you're asking, the deeper understanding, is going to have to wait until a more thorough investigation is done, as Mr. Beisenthal has represented. However, I just want to say, which I should have said at the beginning, that we had the full and complete support of the University of Hawaii in conducting our investigation. It's always a confusing and chaotic scene, both at the emergency and then later in the consequence aspect of, okay, what happened? And so the investigation wasn't something that concluded with just one work cycle or even one day. It went over several days, and once we're done, then that's what we release. And so we're saying that this is a supporting document to other investigations, but it will become our determination of record unless there was something that radically reopens the information and we could amend our report. However, we're confident that we went to the extent that we could to determine exactly what might have happened. Now, why it happened and what roles people play is parts of others' investigation.
There's one more thing too. I want to sort of answer your question, but not entirely. The lab was inspected in January, and this particular setup was, I think, completely set up in February. And that's not to say that our lab experts would have caught something wrong. It's not exactly, it might not be covered in their preview. We're not entirely sure, and hopefully all that will also come out in the investigation.
This more thorough investigation, you're saying, will be completed by when?
We're hoping that it's completed by the end of the month.
By the end of this month? And just the main things you hope to have by the time it's done?
Basically, yeah, an understanding of exactly what happened, what went wrong, where, and more than that. We're hoping that, and we're not hoping, we've also requested that this organization that, once again, is a national leader when it comes to laboratory safety, also has suggestions for us as far as more protocols that we could put into place.
Is this going to fundamentally change how things are reported and what things are reported in these kinds of incidents?
I think that we're just going to have to wait and see as far as what the report says and what the recommendations are. But I think there's already a fundamental change as far as creating that new committee that oversees this one particular area. But once again, the research community is a tight-knit community, and so whatever lessons can be learned here, they might have, hopefully will have an impact on things that happen across the country. But once again, I think the message is already out there. I think everyone kind of stopped to remind themselves about safety protocols, about what they're doing in place, about what we do. And I think this has probably happened at universities across the country.
And I guess knowing what you know now, maybe that smaller incident that happened early in the week, should that be reported in the future when you have something like that?
I think that might go unsaid. I'm not sure exactly how to respond to that question. I mean, it seems like it's something that would, I don't know if it's an appropriate thing for me to answer, but once again, everything will be reviewed, and hopefully we'll make sure that mistakes were made aren't repeated in the future. Not hopefully, we have to make sure that they're not repeated in the future.
Any update on the lab?
The lab is still closed because not only do we have our independent investigators looking into it, HIOSH is still also investigating, so it's still, there's still an active investigation, so it's still basically the way it was after the explosion, except for the bio cleanup.
What committee are you referring to again?
I'm sorry, I don't have the name memorized. The Chemical and Physical Safety Committee. So right now it's being convened. There's going to be a representative from every college and school on campus that has research, that makes sure that they have representatives. If you go onto our website, we have a very robust, all these different safety committees, whether it's animal research, human research, you name it. This is another committee that we're going to create to maybe further the oversight and also work with the our Office of Environmental Health and Safety on reviewing protocols and seeing, once again, what can we learn from this and how can we get better?
So this is a new committee. This was
This is a new
formed
committee
as
that's
a result
being-
from this.
Yes, that is correct.
And going back to that missing gauge cover, so is it possible that was removed from the lab, or is it because
I
it's
don't see why it would be removed. It wouldn't hamper an investigation at all. Once again, it was documented exactly what was purchased and what was in place, and I hope we find it so we can answer that question, but right now it's definitely not impeding the investigation. That's my understanding.
And how does this gauge plays into the whole investigation, the missing?
I think if you refer to the Hawaii Fire Department, their report will explain what it determined the gauge's role in the accident.
Yeah. Well, it's in the report that the gauge was not suited for its purpose. And whether it's there or not, we have enough information to place that type of equipment as the primary source of the leak of gases that were ignited.
And it's just the cover. The other components are bagged and on the scene. It was even something that they didn't even bag because it was the cover.
Any update on the researcher?
We've never, my understanding is that she has been released from the hospital, and I really don't have much more information. It's kind of, it's a privacy issue, and we've never been given permission. I don't think they've given anybody permission to speak on their behalf.
With that being said, both the university and the city, the Honolulu Fire Department especially, know that this has been a devastating event, not just to her, but to the community of researchers. And of course, we want to help them understand, and we wish the best for anybody that was harmed, this researcher or other people that have had similar incidences. Whatever we can do to help people understand how to prevent, that's one of our roles. And we trust the university has the same interest at heart. We know that they do. They just have perhaps a different road to travel because of the scope of their investigation. Ours is complete at this point, but we stand ready to continue to confer with anybody else that the university or outside the university, anyone who's doing another component of the investigation, such as HIOSH or the California Consortium or any other investigation. But again, we hope that this researcher can get past the extent of her injuries and continue to enjoy the benefit of her knowledge and experience as a researcher.
Yeah, absolutely. The University of Hawaii, I think, from immediately after the accident to community-wide messaging, you know, our hearts go out to this researcher. I mean, it's really, it's had obviously an incredible impact on her life and all of us. So our thoughts and prayers have been with her since the day of the accident.